Anyway, all right. Anyway, are we on?
Yeah.
All right. Welcome, Matt. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good this morning. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, today we talk about part 2 of, or rather, section 2 of chapter 7. And chapter 7 is, of course, the chapter on the labor process and the construction of surplus value. And as far as section 2 is concerned, the actual title of section 2 is the production of surplus value. But before we get into the stuff of this particular section in chapter 7, I'd like to set the context, and I'd like to do so by talking about the crisis the economic crisis following the bombing of the towers in New York, and then just discuss it briefly, and then talk also about the contemporary economic crisis to identify a shared component. Okay, and so and then we can get into the stuff of this particular chapter and this particular section. I'd like to get your thoughts on something. And it concerns, of course, the crisis at the outset of the 21st century. After the bombing of the World Trade Center, of course, we were compelled to consume. We were urged to consume. We were urged to go to the mall, right? And it would have been, or rather, the thought was, and in fact, judging by the practices of consumption that took place, just a few years later in 2008, we might conclude that the strategy was effective, and that is, we were pushed to consume, but to consume on the basis of credit, right? And of course, this all came to a head and collapsed in 2008. Those kind of practices brought us to the what is called the Great Recession of 2008. Today, not only are we compelled, to consume, but for some, people are compelled to go to the bar, right, so that they might be served. Think about who is agitating to open the doors and the gates to the different bars and restaurants and so forth. I'm thinking, of course, in my mind, I have images of protesters in Huntington Beach agitating and waving flags so that they might have the freedom, as it were, at least from their perspective, right, to consume alcohol and to be served at bars. And then there's also the push for people to work, right? So it's not just a push to consume and a demand to be allowed, quote unquote, to consume, but then there's also the push for people to work, and to work in a very dangerous moment, in very dangerous social conditions, to use the terms from this particular chapter. In other words, the people, right, at least here in California that we're talking about, the people, of course, who are pushed to work in the service industry, right, are oftentimes, if not disproportionately, Latino and Latina workers, Chicana and Chicano workers. The people that are pushed to work are people who will then be concentrated in sectors, in spaces that are interestingly, at least as far as their safety is concerned, and maybe interesting is not the correct word, but in any case, the conditions to ensure that they go to work and leave work healthy, those conditions are sabotaged. And we'll talk a little bit about this in just a second. But before we proceed and then get into the nitty gritty of this kind of stuff, what are your thoughts, Matt?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the parallels between what happened after 9/11 and right now. I mean, with the drive to consumption, the drive to the almost like kind of like it is your national duty to go out and shop and buy things and rare. I think during 9/11 that was much more coming from the top. That was Bush. That was whatever. We see in this crisis people actually protesting for their right to be served, their right to get a haircut, their right to go to bars, their right to just be served. That's very interesting. That was the when you look at the kind of really very very militant, very very I don't want to say it wasn't really bourgeois necessarily. I don't assume that everyone there was an owner of the means of production, but it was definitely people who were comfortable within the economy, right?
Yeah.
It was definitely with a certain strata of worker, and it was definitely primarily white. And there was this attitude of it wasn't necessarily I need to get back to work. It was more I need to get a haircut. I need to go to the bar. I need to do what I want to do, and you're not going to tell me what to do.
Yeah.
And so I think this round of consumption has definitely been a little more fascist than after 9/11. In that it's arising not just from the top, it's arising from the people. It's arising from the people. Because I remember when Bush said that everybody needs to get back to shopping, it was kind of mocked. It was or not even mocked. It was more just like that's distasteful and what are you talking about? And okay, but could you say it better? That sort of thing, right? There was that attitude. Whereas this is definitely coming. It's definitely coming from the top. I mean, you definitely have Trump echoing these things, but it's also coming from not the bottom of society, but it's also coming from a segment of society, right? Which is kind of like how you would define fascism as not just a top-down operation, but actually a social revolution within in the people. It's all fucked up, but I mean, but nonetheless, it's not just it's not top down. It's the top. It's the middle. It's the bottom. So that's kind of what we're looking at right now, and I do think that
there's
there are distinctions though, because there are distinctions between Trump and Bush, and that and Trump and most other presidents, in that he galvanizes and deputizes in ways that is typically not done, and so that kind of spirit that's out there right now, it's it's not like organizations didn't exist. It's not like these hateful organizations didn't exist. It's not like both Democrat and Republican parties didn't turn a blind eye to them, but it's more like there's this popular, the popularization of it, the valorization of it, the not turning a blind eye to it, but actually that's a little different. It's like it's not the dog whistle anymore. It's the megaphone,
Yeah.
And so I think that's having a popular effect amongst the people. So I think that when you compare the two, this moment's actually far more vicious, and that viciousness is not coming top down, but from all around.
Yeah, the astroturf politics of of 20 years ago have have set the conditions, have set the terrain, if you will, and have normalized the narratives and the rhetoric of hatred, of suspicion. I mean, just if we are only going to look at the last 20 years, right? That rhetoric, the in this case, and I'm not, elevating Barack Obama by any means, but the rhetoric of show me your birth certificate, right? That kind of rhetoric set the stage for the contemporary, show me your papers, that is targeted, to a variety of marginalized and caged people today, and as you say, has generated the spirit such that people have either been deputized, literally deputized, right? Channels for deputizing people in very formal ways have surfaced over the last 20 years. One notable practice, of course, is the construction of something called ICE, right? And then quasi formal deputization of people. And I'm thinking about the Minuteman Project, and then of course now the Karens of the world, if you will, right? The Karens of the world have taken on the badge, right? So the context has been set, the terrain was established, and now it's bearing fruit, right?
Right. Well, I would say that, the Minutemen, SB 1070, oh God, like George Zimmerman. I mean, all these things happened in the era of Obama. I mean, all these things have been around. I mean, I don't want to say like, and then Trump showed up and it was her. But there's a mass movement that he's trying to coagulate. A mass movement that he's trying to coagulate that essentially is just like, this is okay, this is good. In fact, this is great. In fact, you're great. In fact, don't be ashamed. Go out and be like that. So that kind of stuff is like. That kind of stuff is what makes the moment so much more just so much more vicious. I mean, it makes
his capacity to do this rests not just on this narrative, not just on not just on the rhetoric of show me your papers, right? Show me your birth certificate, but there's a tone and a sentiment of mediocrity. Right? That is very attractive because it's very, if you will, reachable, obtainable. It's with an easy grasp, right? And those of us in our society that are, have been acclimated to the context, to the social conditions of the moment, right? Have a particular predilection, right? A particular affinity, a particular inclination towards this mediocrity, and we gain a handle on the mediocrity, and then of course we engage with one another and against others on the basis of this mediocrity. I want to share a short anecdote. I remember when I was at Casa de las Americas about 4 or 5 years ago. I was approached by I was in conversation with a professor there who asked me what was on the mind of folks in the United States that they would have elected or that they would have considered. I don't think he was elected at the time. That they would have considered the viability and the reality of a Trump presidency. And I was dumbfounded. I was dumbfounded myself, and I have to admit that I was as caught off guard when Trump was proposed as a candidate, when his candidacy began to take steam. I was as caught off guard as most folks were when Schwarzenegger became the, back around the time of the World Trade Center, or just, sometime immediately after, equally caught off guard. So it's, and it leads me to get back to this discussion of mediocrity. Before we get into the stuff of this particular chapter and this particular section, because I really do want to get into the social conditions of production, and I want to get into this element of mediocrity, of efficiency, of averageness, if you will, right? I do want to get into that topic, but before we do, what are your thoughts about this question? Mediocrity.
Well, but I don't want to touch on the similarities, right? So the similarities are that you were asked to shop. The similarities are that you're asked to consume. The similarities are that people are demanding that they're demanding that, you know, in the case of 9/11, forget your fear of safety. I mean, however real or unreal that was, right? Forget that. Get back to work. Get back to shopping. Today, forget about your worries about, you know, contracting potentially deadly pandemic. Get back to work. Get back to shopping, right? So the idea of the supremacy of the economy, the idea that this supersedes human needs, the idea that this is, you know, something that is worth dying for, you know, the fact Baskin Robbins is worth dying for.
Yeah.
That kind of connects to events, that connects to responses, and you know, in doing that, it's really interesting. There was a lot going on, a lot of conversations going on during this period, in the early days of it, you know, before the protests, which kind of really changed the conversation. Where people were really talking about, like, well, what is our role as workers? Like, why is it that they need us to go back to work? Why are they demanding we go back to work? What's going on here? You even had Britney Spears. You know, she was retweeting, you know, some very, you know, kind of like I don't want to describe the person's politics, but she was retweeting somebody else who was, you know, of a leftist persuasion. I think more like anarcho-syndicalist kind of mentality, but at the same time, it was an accurate description of the capitalist worker relation, and you know, and so that was kind of like on the table for a minute, and it was a really interesting period when people were asking these questions. You know, I don't know, over at Del Hagua, I wrote an article called "This is the Hour of Our Demands." So, because what I meant by that was that, you know, in this time period where people cannot work, but they need you to come back later to service the market, they're going to make certain reforms. And in this time of reform, whatever reform they have, we must demand that those reforms be made permanent, right? And so that was kind of like where my mind was at before, you know, all this other stuff kind of broke out. And so I do think that, like, you know, this is really, this period of time kind of lays bare a lot of what these relationships actually are. The fact that capital does not need that labor does not need capital. Capital needs labor, and that's like, you know, like that's kind of like an abstract kind of way of talking. You know, reality is that, you know, the owners need the workers don't need the owners, right? And if you think about it, it's not that difficult a concept. Like, just physically imagine, a physical, like a physical space. Imagine a warehouse, right? So now you see this warehouse, you see people working on the line, right? Now, in order for that car to get made, you need those people who are working on the line to make the car, right? Now, in above them is an office, and in this office sits some guy, and this guy owns the factory, right? On a piece of paper, it says he owns the factory, and what he does is nothing. He cannot show up or show up. He owns it regardless, and when the car gets sold, he's going to keep most of the money. Who is actually necessary in the production of this car? This guy who's owns things on a piece of paper, or the actual worker who creates things? So I mean, that's a pretty, you know, it's not that heady a concept. It's described in many heady kind of ways, but it really isn't that difficult a concept, right?
And mediocrity, pervasive as it is, you know, on the shop floor or on the warehouse floor, mediocrity, to the extent that it is the narrative of production, keeps folks from you know, examining their relationship with one another, keeps folks from examining their collective relationship to the guy up in the office, and ensures you know, that today, tomorrow, next week, next month, and next year would ensure anyway that those relationships persist. you know. I'm interested in the phrase, you know, that capital needs labor more than labor needs capital, right? I mean, that's I hope that if our discussion is compelling to anyone today, this morning, I hope that this particular phrase that you have shared with us, I hope that it, you know, it stays with folks. What I'd like to do, Matt, is I'd like to summarize what is happening in this particular section, right? And what Marx does, of course, is he tracks and then he quantifies value as it makes its way from the raw element containing the value that it does to each successive and converging point, and then finally to the culminating moment where the commodity is a use value, right, and packaged for exchange in the market. I'm thinking about a particular quote here that I'd like to share as far as this goes. This metamorphosis, this conversion of money into capital takes place within the sphere of circulation and also outside it. Within the circulation, because it is conditioned by the purchase of the labor power in the market. Outside the circulation, because what is done within it is only a stepping stone to the production of surplus value, a process which is entirely confined to the sphere of production. Thus, and I don't read French, thus tout est pour le mieux dans le milieu des mondes possibles. In fact, I'll just finish with the last sentence here, last 2 or 3 sentences. By turning his money into commodities that serve as the material elements of a new product and as factors in the labor process, by incorporating living labor with their dead substance, the capitalist at the same time converts labor, i.e. past, materialized, and dead labor into capital, into value, big with value, a live monster that is fruitful and multiplies. This is the alchemy, right? This is the alchemy that added to the raw materials is past labor, that is dead labor, right? Living labor, that is the collection of consumed labor power, right? And then these, you know, the commodity then is comprised of these elements, and to the extent that it has utility, to the extent that it is put on the market with its utility, right? It serves to mediate exchange and to generate capital surplus value for the capitalist. It is his alchemy. It is his hocus pocus. Do you care to comment?
The surplus value is obtained from what they don't pay you. I mean, the variable in the production process, from which an item is produced and turned into and therefore commoditized, and put, the commodity fetish, attaches itself to it and is set out in the world to be sold and bought and sold. Well, the variable is what they don't pay you. That is their rate of profit. That is so yeah, I mean, like, your labor is the source of profit. Your labor is what adds surplus value to the thing. Now, with or without the fact that it's a commodity, with or without the fact that it's being put onto a capitalist market, your labor would add some type of human value to it, right? So, like, for instance, like let's say we didn't do things. Let's say even if it was like bartering, right? You would understand that it only was so difficult to build this pen versus how difficult it would be to build a car, right? So I couldn't just come to you and here's my pen, give me your car, right? That you know, you'd be like, wait a minute, wait a minute. This took me 6 months to 5 hours a day, and this took me, you know, half an hour to workshop, right? So I'm not going to give you my car for that pen, right? Of course, you know, so there's still this kind of there's still this amount of human labor that going into something, and also the parts and material, all kinds of other things that would make that trade ridiculous. But you know, so that's the question of you know, the added surplus value, something the thing that the human element put into an item, you know what I'm saying? An item that has use value, right? The use value of whatever it may be, the thing that we need, you know, like how difficult was it to get that banana, you know, all the way up in the tree versus how difficult was it to go pick those berries, right? Okay, so the person who got the banana, whatever the reward system we might have, might be higher than the reward system we have for who got the berries, right? Because we know how much human effort went into getting the bananas. Even if we prefer the berries to the banana, we know how much went into it, so therefore the reward should be that much greater. You know what I mean? Like there would be some, whatever that may be, even if it's just social, even if it's not monetary in our terms of conceiving monetary reward, there would still be some type of human added value that would go into securing the goods and necessaries of our life. But what makes it different is when you put it into this process, then now we're talking about, you know, exploitation, we're talking about commodities, we're talking about the capital system. So of which again the labor is a necessary component in production of anything, and the capitalist is just a parasite.
You know, absolutely right. The capitalist is the parasite, living off labor, and the interesting thing, or the thought-provoking thing, the compelling thing for those of us who are thinking about these things is that the quantity of surplus of value, the proportion of surplus value that can be generated by the capitalist depends on the capitalist's ability to harness and coordinate greater amounts of dead labor than, you know, contained and mechanized as it is, right, in the machinery on the shop floor. The greater the capacity for the capitalist to coordinate and manage and administer dead labor, the greater is the promise of return of the commodities that the capitalist channels into the market. I'd like to talk a little bit about the social conditions of production, Matt, and I'd like to talk about space time as one converging component of the conditions of production, and then of course I'd like to underscore the relationship between the space-time component with the very hocus pocus, with the very alchemy that's taking place, in the relationship between the factory floor or the warehouse floor and what's happening outside of the places of production. And I like to talk about space-time here, especially because as I've noted here, this is the often elusive understanding that escapes our attention. This is an understanding that keeps us from recognizing our relationship, not just with one another, but our relationship with those folks who supervise us, and then those folks who supervise the folks that supervise us, right? And what I'm talking about is that as history has proceeded from one phase to the next, and as we are no longer simply producing products, but producing commodities, right? The technological systems that have been invented or manipulated or integrated into the systems of production, right, become the means of production. And to that extent, right, then the pencil, is produced, or the vehicle, the car, right, is produced much faster, and time, as it were, as a social as a mental construct, time is compressed, and then the space required for the production as much of a pencil as of a car is equally compressed, right? Because now it's all coordinated in smaller and smaller spaces. And and of course, this converges, or this corresponds and facilitates the day-to-day practical, on the floor, visible and tangible things that are taking place as profits are being created, as surplus value is promised, and as labor is extracted. In other words, not only does a shop floor require less time, or rather, not only do workers require less time to produce a commodity, right, but so less space is required to produce a commodity. And this is made possible to the extent, right, that workers are extracted from any authority over the work that they do, and frankly, to the extent that workers' limbs and faculties are subtracted from the production process. And so, this compressing of space and time has tangible results, has tangible and visible consequences as far as the production of commodities is concerned, but also has the capacity to shape our understanding of ourselves, of the person in the mirror, has a capacity to shape our understanding of one another, right, and the expectations that we have for one another. We are more impatient with one another, and on account of pervasive mediocrity, we are more patient with oppressive people. What do you think?
I definitely think we're more patient with the oppressor and the or oppressive people than we are amongst people who are. I mean, I won't say like every single person is, but like generally speaking, people are way more patient with the or more or not. Patience not even the right word. It's subservient to those who would seek to oppress them on many levels. I mean, we're just training the society to like recognize like power. And oh my God, someone just asserted power, and therefore I must do what they said. And like I don't want this conflict. Oh my God, or we're like the opposite. We're like, oh, like everyone's trying to control me, and I'm going to fight back. And neither really a rational response to whatever's in front of you. So I think that it seeps into our everyday behavior. But absolutely, people are absolutely antisocial with those who they should unite with.
Yeah.
And and they are far too willing to kiss the rings of those who would step all over them.
Yeah. We've got some comments on the chat screen here, Matt. San joins us. Thank you, San, for joining us once again. Karina joins us once again. Thank you, Karina, for joining us. And I see Martin Sayre joins us. He's here. In fact, let's go to Martin, since we haven't engaged with Martin yet. At least I don't remember. Martin Sayre writes, Today, over 80% of the industrial workers in the world are located in the global south, while the proportion falls steadily in the north. We may be living in post-industrial societies in the north, but the world as a whole is more industrial than ever. This impacts profoundly the strategy and program of the political leadership of the working class, as does the uncompleted revolution of the Civil War and Reconstruction within the United States and the American usurpation of lands and oppression of the peoples through the Manifest Destiny Project. The national and colonial questions stemming from this present unique challenges to a historical left project. Using a Marxist methodology that you are describing, how do individuals, organizations, and individuals address this in a revolutionary manner in this period? Wow, that's a very interesting question. I'm compelled to think about something in a couple different ways. The first thing that I consider, of course, is Marx's observation that by way of the development of capitalism in the 19th century, and that by way of its development, it was more capable and more efficient in extracting surplus value from commodity production than the pastoral plantation economy that rested on the enslavement of humanity in the South, right? And then corresponding stations and institutions in different parts of what was then the United States. So this is my first thought. Now, I think that the question that Martin is asking, on the one hand, is as in my mind, is as nuanced and multifaceted as it might be, to some extent, easy to manage, easy to answer. And if the capitalist system is going to, and I don't believe that this is the case, it's just that if the capitalist system is as pervasive and as powerful and as capable of reproducing itself, and if we, right, are incapable of contesting this, then we might do what folks in places in South America or in Europe have done, folks that are interested in gaining command of the production process. And we might set up worker cooperatives, right? Where, at least as far as the station is concerned, or at least as far as the factory is concerned, we might resist the exportation of production. We might resist the ensuing and the encroaching post-industrial character of production in the regions that we inhabit. I'm thinking, of course, of things that I've read about and heard about and learned about, where hardware for home, for the production of homes in South America, for instance, in Argentina, has been taken over by the workers. Factories have been abandoned. Factories have been taken over by workers. I believe it's also the case somewhere in the Midwest. I think it's in Chicago. Something along those lines is also happening. And I know I forget, the name escapes me at the moment, but I know that similar systems have burgeoned in Spain. But the challenge is greater than the folks that are doing these noble efforts to save their labor. The challenge is greater than they can take up, which is why they're focusing on their particular stations and the positions that they might save for themselves in their particular stations, in their particular factories. I was thinking about this kind of question, and I'm gonna stop talking for just a moment, in just a moment, so we might get your response, Matt. But I was thinking about this very question just yesterday when I was considering the Hydra. I was considering the pervasiveness, the omnipotent, if you will, presence of capitalism in the various corners of the planet. That no sooner are these inequities and injustices addressed in one spot, that we surface in another spot. And so if there is going to be a response, grounded in a Marxist understanding of the economy, it requires a planetary coordination. If utopia is within grasp, or if it will be within grasp, right? It requires some kind of planetary coordination, a heady project, to put it mildly. Your thoughts, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Yes, it's true. Capitalism is all over the globe. It is true that industry is there are factories being built all over the place. But I would ask, like, is that part of the same, like, kind of like production consumption circuit?
Yeah.
I mean, like, the people that are producing those factories are producing for a different market than the ones that they currently participate in. So that's different. Whatever that is different. Whatever it is, it's different than what Marx described. And like the Nike shoe, the Nikes are made in Indonesia but sold in the United States, et cetera, et cetera. But I would also say that, like, even though where we are today is not necessarily where we're headed, this question of saying, like, okay, oh yeah, automation's here, but it's not everywhere and it's still very industrial. No, I mean, like, we're talking about Foxconn, right? Let's be specific. Foxconn, as early as 2014, was talking about automating their plants. I don't know exactly what year, but I think it was 2018, maybe, is when China surpassed Japan in terms of the purchase of computer numerical controls.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, what is a computer numerical control? Computer numerical control is essentially the machines that make machines, right? It's kind of the framework for machines that make machines. And so, like, for the longest time, Japan had been the number one consumer of these. America or South Korea were number two. But in a very in the last 4 or 5 years, China has surpassed not only the United States but Japan in terms of the purchase of automating, automated technology. So if the Chinese have shown us anything in terms of technology or economic or politics or whatever, they move very fast, And so, like, I see this being the future. The way of the future is robotic production, and it'll go to China, and then after that, it'll start reaching. It'll eventually reach Bangladesh and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It'll eventually reach all these places where things are being produced outside of the imperialist core. So the factory showed up later. The robots will show up later, but the robots will show up. I mean, this is the course of history. So yeah, I just think that's what's going to happen.
Response. How do we respond to that?
We seize the means of production. It doesn't change. We seize the means of production. But the fact of the matter is, these are two distinct questions from one another, right? One is the question of how things are produced and made. What is this science? What is this? What tools are society being organized around? That's one question. The other question is, who owns access to those tools? Who owns the fruit of the labor of the fruit of the labor of the people who work those tools? And that. So these are separate questions, right? Whether something is organized around a plow, or whether it's organized around a steam engine, or whether it's organized around a microchip, who owns and who doesn't is a separate question, right? And the answer to that question is always fight. The answer to that question is always seize the means of production. The answer to that question is always that everyone should own access to that. It should belong to everyone, not to single individual parties, right? So that's one thing. Another thing is what are we fighting for? Are we fighting for a factory? Are we fighting for an orange grove? Are we fighting for a plow? Are we fighting over, mules? What are we fighting for? Separate question. So I do think that,
This Martin's question and the response that we're giving it sheds light on the on a portion of the discussion that we had last week, where we needed to make a distinction, or rather where a distinction was made between the mode of production and the means of production, right? And so when you ask, what are we fighting for?
yeah.
Where would you couch that confrontation? Are you talking about the means of production? Or are you talking about the mode of production?
I'm talking about the means of production. We're talking about the technological base, right?
Yeah.
And the mode of production is like why I think what compels the production.
Yeah.
Right? What throws it into motion.
Yeah.
So the means of production would be like the actual tools that are in play, right? And then you can get into other stuff about like the forces of production, which would include you as well.
Yeah.
But then that's a whole other thing. But yeah. That's the distinction when there's a revolution, was a technological revolution in the means of production that compels forth all kinds of stages of social revolution, which eventually gets people fighting in the streets. But they're fighting in the streets not just over the daily conditions that they face. They're fighting in the streets over something that's shifting. But we have a couple of questions. You want to get to some more of them? We got Karina up here.
Sure. Go ahead. Why don't you read one?
All right. The rise of the demagogue, the election of Trump. Working people do not feel represented by Democratic or Republican parties. And after decades of watching the parties turn their backs on them, they understand that they cannot be salvaged. That's why Gallup reports 2 out of 3 Americans are now willing to call for a major new party, including even a greater number of younger people and poor people. Americans don't find a genuinely anti-establishment home. On the left, people furious will continue to rush the only populism see Trump's brand of xenophobic, authoritarian, militaristic populism, just like they did in the 2016 election. It's one of the most important to progressive launch a populist party. Before we go down further in this path, we must do it now while the opportunity to carry revolution is still left open. Also, the Clinton campaign instructed corporate media as WikiLeaks to elevate Trump in the media. This resulted in Trump getting over $5 billion free airtime mass media. Clinton campaign managers call it a Pied Piper strategy. It backfired. So, I mean, I definitely think that people are sick of it's not just the Democrats though, because there's like, if you look at I mean, let's say the Obama versus Romney. I mean, I don't really see all that much difference between. I mean, other than Romney saying like 40% of people don't want to work or something like that, that in a private thing where, their public rhetoric was very similar. I mean, Bush v. Gore, public rhetoric very similar. I mean, there's always like that the fringes of the Republican Party are like, oh no, but the generally speaking, the leadership has always been kind of just like whoever comes in leadership there, whoever comes leadership with the Democrats is usually pretty similar. So I think that people are sick of all of that. People are sick of these people that come on television in a suit and a tie and tell you that things are going to be okay, and things are going to be all right, and that we're going to fix America. With whatever's wrong with America will be fixed by what's right with America. All that kind of rhetoric that could come out of either party's mouth. They could come from a Bush or a Clinton or this or that or that. They're kind of like center of the road, kind of like I don't know. It's almost like Wilsonian, like staring in a corner about the great great principles of this great land. I think people are tired of that. So we need something that is like we desperately need something else to form.
Yeah. Well, we're at the tail end, son. We'll get to some of your stuff, I think offline, since we're at the and Dust is with us again. Thank you, Dust, for chiming in. You're welcome, Martin. You're welcome. We're at the tail end, Matt, and would you please bring poetic closure
All right, cool. So this one's coming from my next book that I'm working on right now, called City on the Second Floor. This poem is a shorter poem. It's does not end in a hopeful tone, but it's part of a larger collection. So but you can't give them all happy endings. Some of them you gotta be like, just be real with it. All right. This one's called Vanderbilt. Company town from the ground up, Vanderbilt. With the command of the will of millions at hand, not tycoons, titans, or captains, no. Gods amongst men. On your knees. Pay your dues, your taxes, their fees. Make your way, your bones, your peace. Pay the piper your saving grace. Receive whatever small consolation you can in the time that you have. Then leave instruction for your grave, because on the fifth day, Carnegie's rebuilding his image. 4 walls make a factory. 3 meals a union contract. There are only 2 ways this can end. There are states to craft, powers to enact, laws to enhance, and Rockefeller will shoot you where you stand loaded. One nation under the gun, wheels of rail, oil, steel, drill the soil, poison the ocean, puncture the sky to the commanding heights. Harbingers of greed and death, there will be blood. There will be done. Makers of the modern world. Watching it burn. Gods amongst men.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you, folks, for tuning in and giving me the opportunity to engage you and to read your comments and to learn from you. Thank you, Matt, for your poetry. And as always, I learn in preparation for discussion. And then I learn by way of discussion and exchange. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for everyone who joined us.